You know, I still don't know why You've Lost That Loving Feeling would be used as the love theme for that movie. That's an anti-love theme song. All right, here's my question for this week. I've been thinking about this. You know how you go to McDonald's or Burger King, and when you get there, you look at all these lines, right? And you try to choose the shortest one, but no matter which one you choose, it's the wrong one. And then when you finally get to the front of the line, they never have what you want, and so you have to stand over to one side between two lines in line limbo while everyone goes by you. And everybody thinks you're trying to break into their line, and so you're nervous, and while you're waiting there, your extremely intelligent uniformed attendant is not watching the burger slide. You know, there's a little burger slide up there, and when your double cheese fish thingy is ready, it slides down this metal chute, but your attendant is waiting on somebody else by now, and so she doesn't see it come down the chute, and so some other jerk fast food employee grabs it and gives it to his anxiously waiting person in line limbo, and you don't want to say, hey, turn around, look, burger chute alert, because that wouldn't do any good and probably hack the person off, because you know they're not moving fast enough anyway to get over there and grab it. And so 20 minutes later, you kind of trudge out of there with your pathetic little bag of stuff, and you're exhausted from jostling for junk food, you know? Well, on the block where I live, I noticed recently there's this Armenian deli right next door to the fast food place. Now, it's one of those places that sells every kind of convenience store product, plus incense, plus raw meat, plus cold cuts, plus fish, plus those casseroles that nobody ever buys that have strange colored potato salad in them. And the counter on this place, every square inch of the counter is covered. Ginseng bottles, condoms, keychains, Advil, just one little 2 square foot area, you know, where they can put stuff down. And 2 guys run this place. 2 guys run the whole place, Adnan and Georgi. Adnan is the boss, and his brother Georgi is the slave. And so, all right, here's the thing. The Armenian deli sells 92 different sandwiches. I counted them. He has them listed on a big board behind the counter, and he has this menu, 92, including all the sandwiches sold at the national chain burger fast food joint next door, because he specifically copied those sandwiches as a competitive measure. Adnan has a veal cutlet parmigiana sandwich. McDonald's doesn't have a veal cutlet parmigiana sandwich. You know, Burger King doesn't have a veal cutlet parmigiana sandwich, and they're cheaper. And whichever of these 92 sandwiches or 12 salads that you order, it's served to you in like 20 seconds. You can't get the money out of your pocket before it's on the counter. You know, because Adnan yells at Georgi, meatloaf moussaka pepper steak sandwich. And Georgi is afraid of being thrown into a Turkish prison or something, because he just jumps on that cold cut counter, he slices it, puts on the mustard, wraps it up, bags it, slaps it on the counter, and usually Adnan has to wait on the customer to give him the money, you know, and it's a great sandwich, always. Now, 1 out of 100 people go to the Armenian deli. Everybody else goes to the fast food joint. Why? That's my question. Why? Well, speaking of freaky, unexplained occurrences, what do you think of when I put the following 2 concepts together? Horror film and green pea soup. That's right. It's time for The Exorcist. Upchuck Jubilee. This movie made such a pile of money when it came out in the 70s. It launched the career of Linda Blair, Ellen Burstyn as her mama, and, of course, Father Damien Karras, played by Jason Miller. The original. We'll do the drive-in totals at the first break. They got stuff on here. God. Georgi, extra mustard, now. You know, I truly believe if you went into this place and asked for filet mignon, Adnan would say, Georgi, run, get filet mignon. 10 minutes tops, you'd have filet mignon. You know, why aren't those guys millionaires? The unhappy priest is Jason Miller, of course, and Jason was actually very happy at the time he made this movie because he just won the Pulitzer Prize. He wrote a play called That Championship Season that was a big hit on Broadway and has been playing ever since at regional theaters, but this was his first film as an actor, even though Jack Nicholson desperately wanted that part. The director, William Friedkin, chose Miller because he said, I just can't see Jack Nicholson as a Catholic priest, so went with an unknown guy. Unknown for acting. He was well known as a playwright. The studio also wanted Audrey Hepburn as the mother, but Friedkin wouldn't take her either. Instead, he hired Ellen Burstyn, who had been nominated for the Oscar for The Last Picture Show the year before, and she got nominated again for this role, and then she won the Oscar for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore in 1975. And Ellen was 40 years old when all this stardom happened to her. She'd been working for years, kept changing her name, kept trying different stuff. When she was 18 years old, she changed her name to Edna Ray and became a model. Then she worked in a Montreal nightclub chorus line under the name Carrie Flynn. And then she got a screen test in the 1950s and changed her name again to Erica Dean. And then she got a part in a Broadway play and changed her name to Ellen McRae. And then when she got married for the third time, she took the name of her husband, which was Burstyn, and she's been Ellen Burstyn ever since. Nominated for Oscars 5 times, won the Tony, ran the Actors Studio for 5 years, dated our producer. Who haven't you dated, David? For that matter, who hadn't she dated? 2 or 3 seasons ago, she starred in a show on Broadway where she was a nun trying to become a priest, kind of reprising these Catholic themes here. Wasn't a real hot play, closed pretty quick. But this is by far her most famous role as the stressed-out mom of Linda Blair in the movie that caused a sensation in 1973, The Exorcist. And oh, I promised you the drive-in totals, so let's do those real quick. 4 dead bodies, gargoyles, Ouija board, Catholic virgin defacing, levitating bed, close-up neck injections, multiple spinal taps, crotch crushing, 360 head swiveling, green vomit to the face, of course, abdominal carving, eyeball rolling, holy water foo, and of course, exorcism foo, 4 stars. People would throw up when they went to this movie. People fainted. People claimed they had to have psychiatric help after they saw it. Several people used it as a murder defense. I don't know why I killed him. It was right after I saw that movie, though. Started the whole devil made me do it thing, you know, which you can't really use anymore. I don't know what got into me, honey. You know, you're implying that the devil got into you, right? When actually some hormones got into you. All right, well, we're watching the build-up here to what became the most popular horror film of all time. There have only been 2 horror films, really, that caused the whole country to go nutsoid. One was the original Frankenstein in 1931, starring Boris Karloff, and the other was The Exorcist, 40 years later. And same thing in both cases. People got sick, had to leave the theater because they couldn't stand it. Newspapers were full of articles about it. And neither one of those movies is really based on a horror story. Frankenstein is based on the novel by Mary Shelley that was written around 1820. And The Exorcist was based on a novel by William Peter Blatty that was a study of a real case of exorcism in 1949. And he stayed really, really close to the actual facts in the case. And they had Jesuit priests on the set to ensure that it was accurate. What we know about the real case is that the boy was 14 years old. It was a boy. He was 14 years old. He lived in Mount Rainier, Maryland, which is just across the line from Washington, D.C., and it took many exorcisms to get the devil cast out of him. First, he was worked on by the Reverend Albert Hughes, the assistant pastor at St. James Catholic Church, and they took him to Georgetown University Hospital to do the exorcism right. But he seriously wounded the priest with a bed spring wire, and so they had to call in another priest, William Bodine, a Jesuit from St. Louis. He flew in and did the exorcism right for about 3 months before he pronounced the boy free of the devil. So Blatty was able to piece this story together, and he protected the identity of the boy, who was still alive, probably is still alive today, by changing him to a girl, fortunately for Linda Blair's career. Okay, more than you wanted to know, but it is a milestone in horror film history, so I thought you would want to know that. 3210 Bunker Hill Road, Mount Rainier, Maryland, is the house where the kid lived. And every once in a while you'll see articles about that block, the 3200 block of Bunker Hill, because a huge number of people who live there have died violent deaths. And the house was vacant for many years, and then it burned down during a fire department training exercise there. But the area keeps having these murders. And I mean, you could get really spooked by that, but then you go, well, wait a minute, it's Washington, D.C. I mean, let's go 2 blocks over and see if we don't get the same stats. You know what I mean?
More in a moment with Joe Bob's Monstervision and The Exorcist after these messages.
Oh, God, that close-up spinal tap scene. Whew. Even William Peter Blatty couldn't watch that scene. He said he watched it one time when the film was being edited, and he never watched it again. Everybody thinks that the audience got sick during the actual exorcism. No. This is the place in the movie when people fainted and asked for their money back and had nightmares. Now, obviously, we've got to edit a few things out to show this on basic cable TV. Mainly the frequent use of the F word by Linda Blair when she gets injected with the drug and when the doctors try to touch her. She cusses like a psycho sailor all through this movie, and a lot of it is gross and sexual, and there were even articles written at the time saying a 13-year-old girl shouldn't be allowed to say that stuff in a movie. But when she really gets nasty, it's not her voice. It's the voice of Mercedes McCambridge, who can make all kinds of amazing sounds. We know her from the movies like Giant and Touch of Evil and Suddenly Last Summer, All the King's Men. But back in the 30s, Orson Welles said she was the world's greatest radio actress, so she knew how to do frightening noises. Plus, William Friedkin put all kinds of subliminal noise in the movie, stuff that's on the soundtrack, but you don't know where it's coming from, stuff to just make you nervous. Because after all, you don't see her get actually possessed until about 40 minutes into the flick, but you're already dang nervous by that time, you know? Okay, now we get really nasty, so after the commercials, let's go back to it. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm really sorry we had to cut out the words that Linda Blair says. And normally I would go argue with the high sheriffs about it. But this wasn't even close. I mean, imagine what it'd sound like if you slowly cut off the fingers of Joe Pesci and Chris Rock. Imagine what would come out of their mouths, and that's what she says. Oh, man, Linda Blair puts the old iron claw on that shrink's cojones, doesn't she? Do you believe that William Peter Blatty, the guy who wrote the novel and the screenplay for The Exorcist, was basically a comedy writer? Not anymore. You know, he was like this guy who was considered a master of the light 60s comedy. He wrote A Shot in the Dark for Blake Edwards, I think, which was the first Pink Panther movie, I believe. He wrote humorous pieces for the Saturday Evening Post. He wrote movies like What Did You Do in the War, Daddy? And John Goldfarb, Please Come Home, and Promise Her Anything, and The Great Bank Robbery. And the studios would never let him write anything serious. Oh, William Peter Blatty, comedy guy. And then that kind of frothy 60s comedy dried up. People weren't making those anymore, and so Blatty was out of work. And so in the summer of 1969, he got a cabin up at Lake Tahoe and started writing The Exorcist, based on this article he'd read in the Washington Post back when he was a student at Georgetown University way back in 1949. Well, so the novel becomes a bestseller. The movie's the top-grossing horror film of all time. All right, cut to 3 or 4 years later, a studio head is having a meeting. They're discussing a comedy that they want to make. Blatty's name comes up. William Peter Blatty, the guy who wrote The Exorcist, you want me to hire him for a comedy? So he doesn't get that job. He loses the job. Don't you just love Hollywood? They think they know so much, don't they? And now, after the commercials, we return to our quaint little romantic comedy, The Exorcist. You know this movie's still banned on video in England? You know, Billy Graham made sermons against this movie, which is strange because the Catholic Church cooperated all the way on it, and Catholics love it because Catholics love gloomy stuff. Makes them happy. And last time I said that, I got this letter from a Catholic organization. We're appalled. We're offended. You wouldn't have made those remarks about Jews or blacks or Hispanics. Yes, I would. Here, I'll make it easy on you. Just here's those addresses. joebob@turner.com or www.tnt.turner.com/joebob, or do it the old-fashioned way, 1010 Techwood Drive, Atlanta, Georgia, 30318. Just fire away. So here we are, an hour and 5 minutes into the movie, and somebody finally says, what about exorcism? That's what makes this movie so great. We're already scared shirtless here, and we hadn't even started into the exorcism. And Linda Blair is freaking everybody out. I had Linda on my show a few years back, and she said that while they were making the movie, she didn't really pay much attention. They told her, here, go spend 3 hours in makeup. Here, let us strap you into the bed. Here, smile at Jason Miller. Here, now, open wide. And it wasn't until the movie came out and every weirdo in the universe started coming up to her in the street that she realized, oh, the devil was inside me. And they like that. Linda was nominated for the Oscar for the performance, though, and then she did TV movies through the 70s, like Sarah T., Portrait of a Teenage Alcoholic, and she did some of the best B movies of the 80s, Hell Night, Savage Streets, Chained Heat, The Immortal Roller Boogie. And she blames Chained Heat, actually, for ruining her career. She said nobody took her seriously after she made Chained Heat. But she's still getting a few jobs. She lives up in Connecticut, rides horses. She, like, professionally rides horses, show horses. Okay, let's watch her now in the scenes that made cinematic history, and I have only 2 words to say, yuck, yuck. And before you even ask me, yes, it was pea soup. It's true, it was green pea soup. Not Campbell's, though. Anderson's green pea soup. And Linda said she hated vegetables at the time. So it did make her throw up. So you wouldn't learn that on the Family Channel.
More in a moment with Joe Bob's Monstervision and The Exorcist after these messages.
Well, we had to take out a bunch of Mom's cuss words in that scene with the priest. And it might have been a little difficult to see exactly what Linda Blair was doing in that scene where we get the spooky head swivel. But she had a crucifix, and she was repeatedly stabbing herself in the himini homini hasta la pasta with it while saying some very nasty sexual things to Mom. Do you get the picture here? I know it had some jump cuts in there. Believe me, the jump cuts are our friends. If we didn't have the jump cuts, Jesse Helms and Newt Gingrich would be here right now on this set putting handcuffs on me. You know what I'm saying? Okay, let's get to the dang exorcism, okay? I think this priest here is ready to boogie. This got to be William Friedkin's best movie, don't you think? Either this or French Connection. He spent a whole year making this thing, including a whole month in Iraq, shooting that thing at the very beginning. Remember that at the archaeological site? What was that? 3 minutes of film, 4 minutes of film? A month just on the spooky gargoyle thing. You know, they were on expense accounts, I guess. Maybe they just wanted to spend a little time by the pool at the Baghdad Hilton.
More in a moment with Joe Bob's Monstervision and The Exorcist after these messages.
They just don't make projectile vomit like they used to, do they? That projectile vomit still plays after all these years. Actually, the on-screen puking was done by a girl named Eileen Smith. And when they were making the film, they asked her to please not tell anybody that they were using a stunt vomiter. But then later on, she got upset that Linda Blair was getting all this attention for what was rightly her vomit. So she sued the film company trying to get vomit credit. That's a true story. Anyway, Max von Sydow is here, and it's time to get ready for the big battle to the death with the Deauville himself. So the actual exorcism, by the way, takes about 15 minutes of screen time, but it took 3 months to shoot. And William Friedkin was such a stickler for detail that he shot it in a refrigerated room. And when you see this scene, it's actually 0 degrees in that room. They would cool the room down to 10 below 0 and then turn on the lights, and when they started shooting, it would warm up to 0. But it's worth it, as you'll see, as Max von Sydow takes on the devil in the conclusion of The Exorcist right after the ads. Everybody talks about the great makeup job that Dick Smith did on Linda Blair in this movie. He did just as much makeup on Max von Sydow. Max was only 43 years old when he made this movie, but he looks 83. Of course, he made all those Ingmar Bergman movies where you spend 2 hours watching bored Swedish people yell at each other, you know, and that'll make you old.
More in a moment with Joe Bob's Monstervision and The Exorcist after these messages.
It has a 4-door extended cab and a huge trunk with a locking top.
It's a great pickup.
We need a great promotion. What about rent a Ranger for the day, be a Ranger for the day?
Oh, hello, little fella. Yeah.
I don't want to be a ranger.
Let's just rent the Ranger for the price of our economy car.
I like that.
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's
yeah.
Let's do that.
Whenever I see the end of The Exorcist, I always wonder whatever happened to Lee J. Cobb, the creepy detective who's always hanging around. You don't see him anywhere in the last part of the movie. Are we assuming he just doesn't care to know how the 2 priests died? Anyway, the movie was originally 20 minutes longer, but William Friedkin cut it way down in the editing room, and ever since then, the writer, William Peter Blatty, has been kind of ticked off. And he keeps begging the studio to put out a special cut with the original footage in, but Friedkin doesn't like the idea, so that will probably never happen. Blatty's mad because a couple of scenes were cut out that he thinks explain more of the story, like why the devil chooses to possess a 12-year-old innocent girl. But it's still one of the greatest horror movies ever made, and it spawned 2 sequels, which are, of course, among the worst horror movies ever made. All right, next week on Joe Bob's Hollywood Saturday Night, we've got what some people consider the best Stephen King movie ever made, The Shawshank Redemption, starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. And then our second feature is the ever-popular Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. And I guess that's about it. For me, Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that it's lonely at the top, but you eat better. All right, I got a Catholic joke. One day, a cardinal requests a private meeting with the Pope. And he says, Your Holiness, I have some very bad news. Due to some unfortunate financial dealings, the mafia have us in a very vulnerable position. We owe them $500 million. And the Don says he will wipe out the entire debt on one condition. He wants to watch you having sex with a young woman. If you do that, the entire debt will be cleared. He gives me his word. Well, the Pope doesn't like this, and he protests about it, and he asks if there's some other way, but eventually he realizes there's no alternative except to comply with the Don's wishes. So he says to the Cardinal, I'll do this thing on 3 conditions. The first condition is that the young woman must be blind so that she cannot see who is doing this dreadful thing to her. Second, she must be deaf so that she cannot hear who is doing this dreadful thing to her. And the Cardinal says, of course, Your Holiness will do that. And what's the third thing? And the Pope says, she has to have enormous breasts. Joe Bob Briggs reminding you that the drive-in will never die. You don't like Catholic jokes? Did you hear about this foreign lady who was married to an American? And she was not very proficient in English. But she managed to communicate with her husband, but a problem arose whenever she had to go out shopping for groceries. So one day she goes to the butcher shop and she wants to buy turkey legs, and she doesn't know how to make a request, so in desperation she lifts up her skirt to show the butcher her thighs. And the butcher gets the message and sends her home with turkey legs and turkey thighs, okay? So the next day she needs to get chicken breasts. And again, she doesn't know what to say, so she unbuttons her blouse to show the butcher her breasts, and the lady gets what she wants and takes them home. So the third day, this poor lady needs to buy sausages. So she brings her husband to the store because he can speak English. And shame on you.